Hollywood and Washington, D.C. have a certain kind of person. It's a power thing. They have a tremendous amount of power. People in Hollywood have the power to really sculpt Americans' attitudes about a lot of different things. And of course, people in Washington, D.C. have the power to make laws. We've got David Boies using Black Cube to protect Harvey Weinstein, and the same guy is one of the architects of the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, which really shows pretty much right out of the gate that something is seriously awry with the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund.
Yeah. What? So I mean, how do they operate? How does Black Cube operate? Let's hear a scenario.
It all depends upon it's gathering intelligence on people. Like they went after David Boies deployed Black Cube on these journalists that were writing an article on Harvey Weinstein, and they were just looking for dirt on them that they could use to dissuade them to continue writing that article. And with Rose McGowan, they kind of infiltrated her life as like friends. And I mean, who knows what they were trying to do with her? I mean, probably trying to get her to exonerate Harvey Weinstein, but she never did. I mean, and she's been pretty much banished from Hollywood. Even though a bunch of women came out, she was like one of the first and the most vocal. And Harvey Weinstein had gotten away with that stuff for years.
Yeah.
It's, I've kind of come to think that Hollywood and Washington, D.C. have a certain kind of person.
Gee, I wonder what leads you to believe that.
But they're both, it's kind of interesting. Both people in Hollywood and D.C., it's a power thing. They have a tremendous amount of power. People in Hollywood have the power to really sculpt Americans' attitudes about a lot of different things. And of course, people in Washington, D.C. have the power to make laws that govern all of us. And Hollywood Babylon, there was a book written by a guy named Kenneth Anger, kind of a nasty piece of work, but he wrote a book called Hollywood Babylon. And someone needs to write a book called Potomac on the Sodom and Gomorrah on the Potomac. I mean, that I think that would be a good book. That might even be one of my next books. I don't know. Sodom and Gomorrah on the Potomac by Nick Bryant.
It'll be a good one.
But with David Boies, he's handled all this litigation. And these women have to sign these NDAs. So the government has worked very hard to cover up Epstein, but it cannot tell these women that they can't sue their perpetrators, these other perpetrators. But if you get money and sign that NDA, that Victims Compensation Fund is doing something that the government can't.
Why do you think that he hasn't employed Black Cube on you?
Maybe he has. I'm just kind of too obtuse to know. I mean, I know I've had one death threat, but I might have had others. I'm just too much of I'm too thick-headed to. I'm not inclined towards paranoia. So, who knows what happens? I don't know. If you write the kind of stuff that I write, you cannot really be paranoid. That'd be if I had paranoid inclinations, I'd still be underneath my bed.
What else have you uncovered?
So what's really interesting is when David Boies started taking on these clients, these Epstein victims, he quickly conscripted a guy named Stan Pottinger, who was an assistant U.S. Attorney General. And I call him the Forrest Gump of cover-ups. If the government needed a cover-up, Stan Pottinger would be there. He covered up Kent State, where the 4 students got shot by National Guardsmen. There was a tape. The Justice Department had a tape of those soldiers being ordered to shoot, but the grand jury that Pottinger oversaw, that tape was never played. And actually, that tape didn't come out till like 2005. So he covered that up. And the FBI had a program called COINTELPRO, in which it completely trampled on the rights of Americans, open mail, and it sent during this period, a letter was sent to Martin Luther King, who was about to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And it had, I think it had like some tapes of King having an affair. And the letter, which I believe was written by William Sullivan, who was like the number 3 guy, told King that he needed to commit suicide before he accepted the Nobel Prize, or these tapes would come out. Coretta King, his wife, was called and told about his affairs. So it was really, COINTELPRO was really nasty, especially like with the American Indian movement and also the Black Panthers. And there's evidence that COINTELPRO definitely contributed to the death of Fred Hampton, who was a Black Panther in Chicago. But there was a member of the American Indian movement named Emery Aquish, and the FBI floated information that she was an informant, and she was murdered by 2 members of the American Indian movement because they thought she was an informant. So the church hearings, which looked into COINTELPRO, found all this stuff out about what had been going on. And they had 20,000 pages of documents, and they'd interviewed a number of FBI agents. And Stan Pottinger was going to come in and he was going to exact justice. And no one got indicted. Not a single person was indicted for COINTELPRO when Stan Pottinger was the Assistant Attorney General. And Richard Helms, the CIA had a program called Operation Chaos, where they were also doing domestic spying. And Stan Pottinger was going to exact justice with that. And Richard Helms testified before Congress that that no Americans had been spied on, and then the church hearings found out that a lot of Americans had been spied on, and their mail had been opened and other things. And Stan Pottinger was going to get to the bottom of that. And Richard Helms was charged with 2 misdemeanors and had to pay $2,000. And it's kind of interesting. Stan Pottinger he went out with Gloria Steinem for 9 years. Now, she wasn't a CIA asset also. The founder of the Americans or Women's Liberation, I mean, Steinem was getting money from the CIA. Now, she said that she was getting money in 59 through 61. But I found an article in a feminist magazine out of San Francisco that she was getting money from the CIA for the majority of the 60s. So her and Stan Pottinger were a couple.
Hunter Biden, the president's son, or the presidential candidate's son at that point, his laptop computer had been left at a repair shop. The repair owner sent it to the FBI. The FBI verified that the files on the computer were actually Hunter's, and the files, what I call the Laptop 51 case, was a situation in which two prominent former intelligence officers, so Michael Morrell, who I mentioned, and Mark Polymeropoulos, who was a senior operations officer, were apparently approached by a Biden campaign officer who said, in this case, Antony Blinken, now the Secretary of State. So according to Morrell's testimony to the House Judiciary Committee in the spring of 2023, that's what I'm about to tell you, Blinken said, we need help, intelligence help. Remember the press had built up the credibility of intelligence officers. These people know everything about everything and can be believed, from in your heart of hearts. So these people now have credibility. Blinken says, we need help. We need help with this problem. The problem was that Hunter Biden, the president's son, or the presidential candidate's son at that point, his laptop computer had been left at a repair shop. The repair owner sent it to the FBI. The FBI verified that the files on the computer were actually Hunter's, and the files gave credible support to a hypothesis, at least, that both Hunter and his father, Joe, were corrupt in terms of taking money, basically influence peddling with Ukraine, with China, and maybe some other countries. All right, so the campaign now says this is a potential October surprise, a killer. We cannot have this come out and damage the purported integrity of candidate Joe Biden. So Blinken says we need intelligence help. We need to deflect this story in a way that would exonerate the president and not damage his election prospects. Okay, so Morrell and Polymeropoulos write up a short little letter that says this laptop story has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. So as we talked earlier on, the Russians have done all sorts of disinformation kinds of things, including forgeries and so on. So you're using the credibility that these people had built up over time, courtesy of the press, to say it looks like this might be a Russian operation. Have nothing to do with Hunter, nothing to do with Joe. Okay, so they were very careful in writing this. If you examine this letter, and it's online, anybody can find it. It does not say explicitly that this was Russian disinformation. It says it sort of looks like it, has all the hallmarks. Okay, so they knew very well that was, not the point of this letter. They knew the point of the letter was to help Joe Biden.
In your opinion, did it have all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation?
Probably. Well, I mean, it's conceivable, but it's not likely. I mean, we know that there are. We know the Russians do cyber operations, but we also know now, not at the time, but we know now that the FBI had already checked the computer and had already determined that this surely did look like real. Their cyber forensic people had already determined that this was legitimate Hunter Biden material. And that's not been challenged at this point. So you're trying to mislead voters using intelligence credentials as a rationale for it, knowing full well that the Russians were not behind it. Okay, so these two go to number of former intelligence officers and ask for their signatures on this open letter. So back up a step, among the many things that the press had done over the previous 4 years had been to publish a series of open letters. open letters. They usually were published in Politico, a politically oriented newspaper based in Washington, and then were spread to the other mainline press organizations. And that's the way it worked this time here too. So you get this short letter. It sort of looks like the Russians were in it. You get 51 former intelligence officers to sign it. You look at that list, a lot of senior people, there were like half a dozen, 5, I think, former CIA officials, a lot of very senior people. So this is a credible group of people, right? So you're a voter, gee whiz, these really sharp people are saying it looks like Russians. So I'm not going to worry about Joe Biden. Okay, so how do we know that this was basically a sham? Basically, this was a political operation. It was an information operation by Morell and Polymeropoulos. Well, Morell told the House Judiciary Committee that, and I can tell you, not commonly published thus far anyway, that one of the people who was approached told me that the pitch received specifically was, we want your signature to help Joe Biden. Not for your intelligence expertise.
Man.
So the pitch was explicitly political. Okay, so now Morell has had his credibility shot, I think, pretty clearly. He's now out of the partisan limelight, at least for the moment. He does have his own podcast, which is credible, and he's staying out of partisan politics. So I have no grievance against what he's doing on a day-to-day basis here in 2024. But he was the epitome. This I think was an epitome, now well documented, of what was wrong with political activism by former intelligence officers. Once again, let me
what he's doing today is credible.
Pardon me?
Did you say what he's doing today is credible?
In the sense that he's doing credible podcasts. He's doing things about intelligence that are not domestically partisan in nature.
Do you think he's building that to?
Well, he might.
his
He
next-
might. My guess is he's still got a number of years to live. He hopes he's trying to do something that's reasonable and is within his area of expertise. And I guarantee you that if he begins to be partisan again, then there are people who will go after him. So he probably knows that at this point.
The reason Hunter Biden is untouchable and the Burisma scandal could not be brought to light, and the FBI interfered in the 2020 election and told Mark Zuckerberg not to publish anything about a leaked story about Hunter Biden and Burisma, is because Burisma is at the dark heart of the grand Ukraine energy play. Burisma, the famous largest private gas company in Ukraine. And I've been making the point now for many years that the reason Hunter Biden is untouchable and the Burisma scandal could not be brought to light, and the FBI interfered in the 2020 election and told Mark Zuckerberg not to publish anything about a leaked story about Hunter Biden and Burisma. Remember, the FBI specifically mentioned Burisma to Mark Zuckerberg in the context of that laptop story, is because Burisma is at the dark heart of the grand Ukraine energy play. I mean, we could go really deep on this. I mean, the short version of it is, it has been a central plank of U.S. statecraft in seizing Eurasia, which has trillions of dollars in natural resource. Russia alone, it sits on $75 trillion worth of natural resources. For context, the U.S. only sits on 45 trillion gross. So, and then you have, Uzbekistan, you have the whole Caspian Sea, you have the whole Central and Eastern Europe arc of Eurasia. It is where most of the world's resources are. And so that has been the long range plan since the Cold War of politically acquiring those countries And the expansion of NATO has solidified that, since 1990, and the early 90s when we told Gorbachev NATO wouldn't expand one inch to the east, but we've acquired all those territories over time. So I'm going with the long version now just because we're just going to do it. But stop me at any time. In the 1990s, Russia was basically a U.S. vassal state. It was like Greater Alaska. Boris Yeltsin was our puppet. He was literally giving real-time updates to the National Endowment for Democracy, our big CIA cutout, in 1993 when he was bombing his own parliament building, who were filled with nationalists who were opposing Yeltsin for going through with the shock therapy privatization to Western stakeholders. You had $2 trillion worth of wealth held by the government of the Soviet Union when they turned into a capitalist state, when they transitioned from the communist government to a democratic one with elections and, of Yeltsin and then Putin. As part of that becoming a democracy, the State Department, the Harvard Endowment, Wall Street banks, the George Soros financial firms, the Bill Browder financial firms, all of these different whole of society, international financiers and business interests descended on Russia to buy up at fire sale prices all of these previously state-owned assets. This is a big part of our diplomatic toolkit. When we transition an authoritarian government, we will privatize their gas companies, their oil companies, their diamond mines, their copper, their whatever it is that's being held in trust for the people, so that whatever grows out of whatever grows out of their soil, whatever flows from their Nile, whatever is in their caves and mountains, it's no longer for those people. It belongs to ExxonMobil. It belongs to De Beers. It belongs to Monsanto. And so those companies work with the State Department. They are part of these stakeholder negotiations within the blob. And so privatization is always, always, always on the table whenever we topple a government. And we have many back channels to accomplish that. Might be a little bit outside the scope unless you're super interested. But effectively, in the 1990s, Russia was our vassal. In fact, you can watch a movie called Spinning Boris. It's a Hollywood movie with Jeff Goldblum, from Jurassic Park. But it was this movie was about basically the U.S. efforts and the U.S. government efforts to rig the 1996 election for Boris Yeltsin because his own people hated him so much for giving their country to the United States and selling them out and handing it all over to, George Soros and the Harvard Endowment and Wall Street and London banks, that they wanted him out. So the U.S. had to send in a Hollywood team, had to send in political consultants, had to send in, TV advertisements, had to fund all these civil society institutions to astroturf some sort of political semblance for their puppet. This is a problem we ran into in Afghanistan, for example, with people upset at Hamid Karzai. This is a very common thing: is we, invade a country or we take over political control. The people have nothing, and they're unhappy. This is why we want people to have nothing but be happy. When they're unhappy, they go against us, and they might depose us from power. But effectively, when the Russian stock market crashed and finally there was no gas left in Yeltsin, Putin rose to power. And the big way that he reasserted Russia's reemergence on the world stage was through what our State Department called energy diplomacy, or basically soft power influence using Europe's dependency on Russian oil and gas, particularly the gas. Because a couple decades ago, 100% of Europe's natural gas, practically 100% of it almost, came from Russia. And this is just the natural result of the economics of gas. Natural gas is very cheap. You take it out of the ground, you put it in a pipeline, you take it to the other point, and the other country is gas. The only real alternative to that is something called liquefied natural gas, LNG, something folks may have heard a lot about because it's a major part. It's this much more new technique than simply gas pipelines. But essentially, what it involves is you can do it over much longer distances. You can do pipelines over whole oceans, because it doesn't require a pipeline. You liquefy the gas when it comes out of the ground. You store it in a container. You ship it to any point on Earth or to Mars, hypothetically, and then you deliquefy it. But that's very expensive. it's much, much more expensive. And so countries naturally wanted to buy Russian gas rather than much more expensive North American LNG. And because of their dependency on Russia for that, when Putin took power and began to wrest himself off of the sort of Yeltsinite, sort of NATO-friendly relations, he used Europe's dependence on Russian gas to trade that for favors to get more Russian political influence over Central and Eastern Europe, to increase trade ties, to increase political ties, to create this sort of Russian soft power influence over the internal politics of countries stretching from Germany, all the way into the Baltics. And around 2005, 2006, this begins to be a problem for the State Department because at that point, Russia was using a lot of hardball tactics. In Georgia, they turned off the gas. It was going to be a cold winter in these Central and European countries unless they gave Russia what it wanted on its trade terms and its security terms and its political influence terms, because they were dependent on Russia for gas. And so when this started happening time and again, the State Department developed a counter strategy. Again, this is 16 years ago. The State Department, with assistance from the CIA and the Pentagon and the whole diplomatic toolkit of energy NGOs and things like this, and in order to get Europe to get off primarily hydrocarbons. At the time, that was the main advantage that Europe had. This is sort of before the fracking revolution really took off, but also to go through what it called energy diversification, which meant that as part of America's security guarantees for Europe, as part of our diplomatic and financial support and guarantees for Europe, they would have to buy more expensive gas from the West than gas from the East. Now, you can only do so much before a country goes broke, unless they have an alternative gas supplier, and this is where Burisma will come back into the picture. But so these countries went through about a decade of diversification milestoning. They went from 100% to 80% to 70% to 60% Russian gas as the State Department continually applied pressure for them to give their taxpayer dollars to Americans and British companies like Shell instead of from the Russian Federation via Gazprom. So the State Department has seen Gazprom as an instrument of statecraft for Russia, again, for 16 years now. And there was a time when Gazprom was the largest company in the world in the early 2000s, just to give perspective for how influential this was, before this energy diversification program, cut back on a lot of their profits. But the key to this was Ukraine, because all of this gas pipeline architecture is already pre-existing. There's the natural gas pipelines that go directly from Russia into Ukraine and then on into Europe. And then there's an alternate pathway that was established years ago called Nord Stream 1, which was directly into Germany. And then Germany, as folks know the tale, tried to develop Nord Stream 2 with Russia. And what happened to that. But this State Department, CIA, Pentagon strategy of killing Gazprom and replacing the gas market with Americans, Canadians, Brits has been this long-range plan that has been the bane of American statecraft, because their inability to get it down to zero, their inability, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps back, as different rising politicians in Central and Eastern Europe want what's best for their people. They are responsible to their constituents. Their people want cheaper energy. Russia's offering the cheaper energy. So absent the ability to provide a cheaper commodity product, the people organically have wanted that Russian gas, and so they've had to constantly suppress populist political groups in Central and Eastern Europe who might run on a platform or who are running on a platform of buying energy from Russia.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.